Test, test. Good morning. We'd like to start. I'd like to welcome you to the Chelmsford Public Schools. My name is Jay Lang. I'm the Superintendent of Schools, and I was honored to ask to open this morning on behalf of Laurie. So welcome to Chelmsford. We're a great school system. I'm very happy to be the superintendent here. We have two middle schools in town. We have McCarthy Middle School and then Parker, which you're at today, and we're very happy to have this first forum here in Chelmsford. To kick us off this morning, I'd actually like to ask a few of our Girl Scouts to come forward and help us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So could I ask Abby and Riley, Lucy, Mackenzie, and Emma to come on over here and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Girls, come over here. Come on over here. Come on over here. Okay, come on. Are you ready? Go ahead.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Great job. And those are some of our second grade students at a couple of our different elementary schools in Lowell, and we're very happy to have had them be able to come with us today. We have a senior at Chelmsford High School, Isabel Cole, who I would like to ask to come up, and she'll actually say a few words about the Congresswoman and introduce us to us. So could I ask our senior from Chelmsford High School, Isabel Cole, to come and join us.
Good morning. My name is Isabel, and I'm a senior at Chelmsford High School. And I was honored to meet Laurie over a year ago, and I've been inspired ever since. So as some of you may know, Laurie was born and raised in Lowell and in a working-class family and spent her career in public service as well as working as a congressional staffer before moving on to business, where she co-founded a woman-owned consulting firm. She's the mother of two young daughters, Gracie and Caroline, and 3 stepsons. Again, I met Laurie at a rally to end gun violence last year, and that's when I started supporting her campaign. Since taking office in January, Representative Trahan has been named to 2 committees, Education and Labor, as well as Armed Services. Since taking office, Laurie has been prioritizing her time right here in our district. If you follow her on social media like I do, you'll be amazed as how she fits so much into one day, as well as how she prioritizes the people first. So the best part of this is I know she's just getting started. So please join me in welcoming Representative Trahan.
Well, good morning. You don't know what to expect when you have your first of what will be many constituent town hall meetings, but this is amazing. So thank you. Thank you for coming out, and thanks for giving me your time. Certainly, I know what will be your concerns and your questions. I want to first thank the Girl Scouts. That was fabulous. It's always nice to see the next generation of leaders who are coming up, especially when they're young, amazing young women. Thank you. And I want to thank Isabella Cole, who I had the privilege of meeting on the campaign, as she mentioned, at the March for Our Lives, when I was with not only my mom and my sisters, but my 2 young daughters. And it is so great to see, and I had a first row seat last year, so many young people coming off the sidelines in droves and taking an active role in what was a very important campaign. So thank you, Isabella. I know we're just getting started in terms of what you're going to accomplish in the world. So it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be here at my first town hall. It's an honor to serve you as a member of Congress down in Washington. It's something I still wake up every single day and just consider the biggest honor, the greatest honor of my life. During the campaign, I ran on the promise of delivering for this district. And I hope that you all know that I very much consider this job here. We spend a lot of time getting around to every corner of the district, working with communities, community leaders, mayors, city managers on what their economic development needs are, what their infrastructure needs are, what those nonprofit groups need in the way of federal funding to fill in so many gaps that exist today for families in need. And we also meet with a lot of constituents. You know, we pick up the phone every single day and we learn of a new problem that exists. Some of them are familiar to us, but many of them are new. You know, we do a lot of work with the families who are affected right now by the Columbia gas explosions and mitigating those claims with Columbia gas. But then we work on making sure people have their veterans benefits, making sure people aren't stuck in the Social Security system, making sure people have their immigration needs met. And so I'm really proud of the team that we've assembled, both here in the district as well as in Washington. So many of them are standing here today, so I would urge you at the end of this town hall to definitely get to know them. And if you have concerns or if you want to have meetings in the office, let's make that happen. It would be great next steps for us. So Isabel mentioned that I'm proud to serve on 2 committees. I mean, so much of what you do as a member is done on your committee. So the committee assignments are very, very important. You spend a disproportionate amount of time there. And the Armed Services Committee is not only important to protecting our men and women in uniform, but also making sure that we are secure in the way of cybersecurity, national security. Interesting, it wasn't looking good for Ed and Labor, which is a committee I talked a lot about last year. Someone who went through public schools and needed a scholarship in order to go to college, and just opening up more practical paths of education was something that I believed in. I really got hyper-focused on getting on that committee, but it was a competitive committee because I wasn't alone in terms of wanting to be on it. But we're persistent, as many women in elected office are. And we did. We got on that committee. And what's happening on that committee, it feels like home. We've already marked up school rebuilding, which is federal funds that is so badly needed to repair our failing schools as part of a broader infrastructure package. So I'm really hopeful that that's actually going to move in this Congress. We've marked up federal minimum wage, getting to $15 like the state of Massachusetts has. Yes. We've also had hearings and marked up Paycheck Fairness, equal pay for equal work. And we'll look, yes, I know there's a lot of clap lines on this committee, I have to tell you. It's why I'm so proud to serve on it. And we've also introduced legislation for paid leave, a national paid leave policy. And certainly, you know, we're going to continue these hearings, making sure that our teachers get the pay that they deserve, making sure that we're properly funding in elementary and secondary education, and continuing to fight for college affordability. So I'm really excited about the work being done on that committee. We've also had some wins on the House floor. Many of you know that there's nothing quite like taking your oath of office in the middle of a government shutdown. It kind of takes the momentum out of an exciting day, because you know what you realize is as people are leaving the room, you have to open up the government. I mean, that is your job. And we did for 27 days. File legislation, pass legislation, put pressure on the Senate, tell the stories of people who were affected by the shutdown, whether it was working without pay or being forced to work, working without pay or being locked out of their jobs. We told those stories, and that brought the shutdown to an end. But then we immediately followed that with H.R. 1, which was a sweeping government reform package, one that addressed the dark money in our political system that we so badly need to get rid of. It also passed a bunch of reforms in terms of ethical standards and how we're going to hold our elected officials to high ethical standards. And finally, getting rid of all those obstructions to our voting rights. And so it was a very proud moment. It's always a proud moment when you get to stand there and listen to Congressman John Lewis remind us of why we need voting rights and restore the Voting Rights Act in this country. And so many of the freshmen who I was sworn in with ran on reform. And so it was an important first piece of legislation to pass. We were able to pass 2 amendments as part of H.R. 1. There wasn't a lot missing from that bill, but there were a couple things. One was giving voting rights to military families who are deployed and might not be living at home through absentee ballot. And another was making sure that no foreign national, no foreign interest could serve on an independent redistricting commission. We also had a legislative win by bringing over the last 10 yards passage to protect the Nashua River, something that Congresswoman Tsongas worked really hard on the last Congress, part of the biggest land and water conservation package this Congress. So I was really proud to be a part of that as well. Yeah. So I think I'll leave with one other thing before we open it up to questions, because I really want this to just be a dialogue amongst 200 people and me. But when I ran, I took a pledge not to take corporate PAC money. It was an important pledge to take. There is obviously an erosion of trust and faith in our government, and we want to do everything that we can to restore that trust in our elected officials. And there isn't a day that goes by that I'm not reminded that there's some lobbyist or some special interest group that would love me to not have that pledge in place. They don't think it's important. But I ran with a bunch of other members who thought it was as well. And it's the reason why we were able to get the momentum and get the passage of H.R. 1 and restore government back to the people. I take Article 1 very seriously. The fact that Congress is a separate and co-equal branch of this government, and making sure that we, make that branch of government for and by the people. So that's why I'm with you here today. That's why I plan to do many, many more of these over the course of this year and next year. But this is what it's all about. I'm your representative. I really look forward to hearing your thoughts, your concerns as we go into this legislative session. I really look forward to channeling those thoughts and concerns in my role down in Washington. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
So over here from the side table, a couple of things we'd like to do this morning is as individuals came into the room, they had the opportunity to write a question down for Congresswoman to address. So I have those for you. Prior to getting into those questions, though, I'd like to just recognize a few representatives in the office, in the room today here, elected officials and also distinguished guests with us. We do have from Chelmsford, our Police Chief, Jim Spinney, is with us today. Back. Then we have from the Chelmsford School Committee, Donna Newcomb. From the Ashburnham Westminster Regional School Committee, Ellen Holmes. From the Chelmsford Board of Selectmen, Pat Wojcik, up in the back. And also from the Tingsboro Selectman, Ron Cohane. So Laurie and her office would very much like to thank those individuals for coming today and being part of this. So if you don't mind to start some of the questions that have come in from the different guests that are here today. One you just touched on, but a resident from Groton asks, what is the status of H.R. 1 and what are you doing to limit the influence of lobbyists?
Yeah, nope, that's a great question. H.R. 1, it's a comprehensive package. It was a package of over 75 separate pieces of legislation, and I think about it in 3 separate categories. It was everything from taking dark money out of our politics, making it more transparent for starters. taking foreign influence out of our politics, ethical standards, the disclosure of tax returns, all the way to ensuring that members of Congress aren't reaping the benefit of becoming lobbyists right after they leave office, and certainly voting. I mean, if we saw anything last year, it was this this lack of access to the polls that really caused a lot of harm in North Carolina, which we're going to have a new election because of, certainly in Georgia and elsewhere. So we are pushing and putting pressure on the Senate to take up that bill. It's an important bill. It's an important package for the Senate to vote on. Certainly, if that package, for some reason, does not pass the Senate, and there have been some rumors that this has been a power grab. And he's right. When the Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, says that, he is right. It is a power grab. It's meant to take the power and restore it back to the people. But I will tell you that, we always prepare for all scenarios. And if that package doesn't see the light of day on the Senate floor, we will start passing individual parts of that bill on the House floor to make sure that any combination, any place where we can find common ground, and there is common ground, there is agreement with some folks on the other side of the aisle on some of these reforms. If the package itself is not palatable to everyone, we're going to keep going at them with different portions of that bill. So I look forward to keeping you updated on the status of H.R. 1, but then also as our backup plan in terms of getting some of those important reforms passed one by one.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, no, as follow-up, one of your constituents, Jen from Tewksbury, has a question for you going in a different direction. What are you doing to ensure our district, and our country at that, are safe from gun violence? Are there particular actions that you're considering or you're promoting?
Yes. So H.R. 1 does get all the attention because it's one. But really, there are a bunch of HR. Well, you know that you're important and you're a real priority when you've got an HR single digit, right? H.R. 8 was another piece of legislation that I couldn't be more proud to, one, originally co-sponsor, and two, to see pass the House. It is the universal background check legislation. Long overdue. It's long overdue legislation, but I have to tell you, I have the privilege of serving with Congresswoman Lucy McBath from Georgia, who lost her son to gun violence, and hearing her impassioned plea for doing this most basic reform, right? This, which we had bipartisan support for, and that was why it was such a proud moment, is because Republicans joined us in passing that bill. There's so much more to be done. And we know that. I think we're all a little envious when the Prime Minister of New Zealand, within 6 days of a major tragedy, outlawed all weapons of mass destruction and assault weapons in her country. And I'm proud to co-sponsor the companion legislation in the U.S. House, banning assault weapons. But we took one big step. And it was an important step, and we're going to continue to build on that. Please, I encourage you to call. I mean, this is a group, Moms Demand Action, which I was a part of, March for Our Lives, which is where I met Isabella, and so many people call our office on a daily basis around legislation that's being introduced that you want me to sign on to, and you have me as an advocate. These are reforms that we need to protect our communities, to protect our children, young and old. So thank you for your support on that.
Great. Before we move on to our next question, I would just also like to recognize the chairman of the Littleton Board of Selectmen who joined us here this morning, Paul Glavy. So Paul has joined us as well. Lori, the next question comes from Jen in Tingsboro. It's a little long, so here's how we go. It says, I'm a teacher who writes a check for more than my take-home pay for daycare some months. What measures do you support to alleviate the cost of childcare for working families and support women in the workplace? I don't see a way for women to achieve equal pay and have equal opportunities if government does not address this issue somehow.
That is, what? No, is this right? Okay, good. All right, thank you. That is a terrific question. Look, it's in part why I ran for this seat. There are too many women who aren't able to actually participate in our economy because they do the cost-benefit analysis all the time. How much does it cost for me for childcare versus how much am I going to get in my paycheck? I felt that right when I had my first daughter, and I know millions of women do. We need affordable daycare in this country. We need universal kindergarten in this country. That does two things. Yep, that you can clap for that. It does two things. It closes the achievement gap in our country. We don't need to read another study to know that early childhood development closes the achievement gap well up into your adult years. It also gets more women off the sidelines and gives them the empowerment to jump into the workforce, which so many women want to do. And that's an issue that comes up on ed and labor. I mean, look, paid leave, we need to join the rest of the world in allowing paid leave so that we can take care of our loved ones, our in-laws, our parents, our spouses, our children, and not be dinged for that. And there is a plan to do that. It's modest. It's a nominal amount out of folks' paycheck that goes into a fund that's matched by employers and allows folks to take that leave when they need it. Equal pay for equal work. This one is near and dear to my heart. I worked in tech. I felt it every day. We haven't made much progress on that. And we need to have paycheck fairness. We need to make that a thing of the past where the same job that's done by a woman is paid the same amount as her male counterpart. This hurts women across the board, but it most disproportionately harms our women of color. If a woman today makes 82 cents on the dollar compared to her male counterpart, that dips to like 60, 50 cents when compared to African American women, Latino women. So we need to fix this problem once and for all, and it's one that I get to do on the Ed and Labor Committee and what I'm proud to do on the Ed and Labor Committee.
Here's a fun one. How did you overcome barriers and sum up the courage to run for Congress as a woman? And what is it like serving in this new historic Congress with so many newly elected women? Go, Congressman Trahan.
Oh, thank you. So first of all, I have to thank Jay Lang. I went to high school with Jay. Him and I went to Lowell High School together. I played volleyball with his wife, and longtime friend, doing great things in Chelmsford, where my three stepsons went to school here. Not this particular school, because they were South Row, McCarthy Junior High, but great school system. How did I summon the courage? You know, I knew after the 2016 election that I had to do something. I mean, there were only 19% women in the Congress. I was working in a field where we're trying to get more women into leadership roles in business. I knew what happened to the conversation when more women were around the table, and I felt so strongly about needing more women around the table down in Washington. But I was really happy with my Congresswoman, so I just sort of thought about how am I going to help more women get elected, and then Congresswoman Tsongas announced her retirement. So it wasn't a long deliberation. It was one of those moments of clarity that I think is rare in your life. I've made a lot of career decisions with a lot less clarity. So this one was, I didn't have to summon courage. I didn't have to think long and hard. I, of course, had a few conversations with my husband about how we were going to make the logistics work. I knew I'd love the job. I think the deliberation I had to go through was, will I survive the interview process? They're very different. And, but, you know, I think what we all saw in 2018 was a lot of women who thought just the way I did. It was much easier for me to jump into a field of 10 candidates where there were 5 women. It was much easier for me to run alongside thousands of women who were running across the country. The women whose shoulders I stand on, they didn't have those optics. They didn't have that support. So what they did was much harder and required much more courage than me. So it is a very proud class to be a part of. It is the most diverse class ever elected to this Congress on all different dimensions, race, ethnicity, faith, age. But I also join now 131 women who serve in the United States Congress. And that's important. That's important for our Girl Scouts to see. That's important for our young sons and daughters to see. Those are optics that didn't always exist. And we're not going backwards. We've changed forever.
Great. We're going to change gears here with a line of questioning for a second. I'm going to apologize ahead of time if I get a couple of these names wrong. But this is a question that comes in from Jerry from Dracut, and he thanks you for your success in protecting portions of the Nashua, Squanicook, and Nissitissit.
Squanicook, Nissitissit.
Thank you. That's why I apologized ahead of time. But Jerry's an avid fisherman on these waters for over 20 years. He's very appreciative for the efforts. But can you tell us if there's anything around conservation efforts that you plan to sponsor yourself?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I appreciate the shout out to the Nashua River, making it a wild and scenic designation. We need to do more of that. There are I believe 4 in Massachusetts, which I'm told is pretty good. But I did meet with many of the river groups and the Nature Conservancy. Can you help me, Jay? The Conservancy Fund, because there's more we can do. I was a staff person when we had that same designation, fought and passed that same designation for Soesco, which is the Sudbury, Assabet, and Concord rivers, giving them that designation so that those would be protected resources far into our future. So I was happy that Nashua got theirs. Look, I'm looking long and hard at the Merrimack River, a river that we all look at all the time, one I grew up on, one that supports urban youth in Haverhill, Lawrence, Methuen, Lowell, and sits between, Manchester and Newburyport. That river is not in great shape. It's gone backwards in the course of my lifetime. So what I'm hopeful is that we can get some federal funding, deal with some of the sewage overflow issues, and we're working with the state reps and the state senators from those districts to ensure that that happens. But then also, make sure that it is a vital river that, urban kids have access to. We need to clean it up, and we can also explore some opportunities to have, recreation on that river, like we've done in the past, but I think we can expand that. So I'm excited to take a ground floor approach at looking at those rivers that we hold so dear in the district, and we're working with those groups to help preserve and protect them.
Great. I'm also...
Can I talk more broadly about the environment?
Sure. I was just going to say that I'm actually appreciative of the Merrimack River. It's easier to pronounce than the other rivers.
It is, especially when you've known that river since day one. I am a co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. And I'll tell you why. There's no question that the Green New Deal laid out some bold goals for our country. We need bold goals. We need to reverse so much of what's been damaged the last few years by not focusing on our environment. But the number one reason why I did is just to change the conversation. We are having a conversation now about the environment, and we need to. It is a precious, our environment is the most precious resource, and we need to take care of it. And so there's going to be a lot of proposals that are discussed. A carbon tax, carbon capture, high-speed rail, getting to renewable energy at a timeline that we can handle, especially in this region. And we need to have all of those conversations because we haven't been having them, and our children and our future are paying a price as a result. So, sometimes people say that, they mention some of the myths around the Green New Deal. Look, it is an aspiration for our country for us to be setting bold and audacious goals for us to work toward. And we're going to figure out what those goals are. We're going to figure that out in this Congress. We're going to figure it out in this session. And that's the conversation we all need to be a part of. Thank you.
I'm going to try to actually put a couple of questions together just because of some themes that are coming through on the questions to be able to get more addressed today. But Jackie from Haverhill first asks, what is your position on health care along the spectrum of the current system to a Medicare-for-all type system? And that kind of ties in with a question from Rose of Chelmsford, who says, what is being done to reduce the cost of health care in general? As an example, some diabetics are having a difficult time just affording their insulin. Could you maybe just touch on healthcare in general and your...
Got a lot to say about healthcare. And there's so many different aspects of healthcare. There is no question that the rising cost of healthcare, prescription drugs, premiums, all of it, it's like the biggest bucket of cost that is causing harm to our working and our middle-class families, our small businesses. It's, I often said last year, and I still say today, we've got a growing economy right now. We've got record unemployment. All of that is true. But when I talk to families, that's not the issue. The issue is this high cost of living that is so dramatically outpacing people's earnings. That's what's crushing us, right? I can't afford my kids' college. I can't afford my prescription drugs. I can't afford the outlays I have to make for health care. That struggle is real, and we have to confront the cost of health care. That is the main reason, because of that growing bucket of cost. It's the reason why I'm a co-sponsor of Medicare-for-all. Now, we need bold change on health care. We need to make health care have a broader reach, extend to more people. And there's going to be lots of proposals, a suite of proposals addressing making health care universal and making it more accessible and more affordable for people. But I don't want us to lose sight of one thing that's really important. We are still protecting the right for people with pre-existing conditions to have access to health care. It's crazy to have to say that, right? 24 million people got health care, access to reliable health care when we passed ACA. And it's under threat. It's under attack all the time. The Texas lawsuit, the introduction of junk plans that try to backdoor and offer plans that discriminate. Guys like my dad who have MS. I mean, I'm not unique. We all have somebody in our family, in our orbit, who has a pre-existing condition. So I do look at this as a short-term fight and a long-term battle. We have to make sure that we shore up and we have to make sure that we shore up ACA, we stabilize ACA. We have to make sure, and this is an area where I think we are going to have bipartisan agreement with Republicans, is on prescription drugs, right? When we sort of set out this year's agenda, It was HR 1 for the people. It was how are we going to lower prescription drug costs, and how are we going to create more jobs and give more good-paying jobs by investing in infrastructure. So I do think prescription drugs is going to be one of those areas where we're going to be able to work with Republicans and get something passed this year. But we have a lot of work to do on health care, and we're looking at every single proposal. We're reading them all in depth so that we understand them all. But anything that moves the ball toward universal, affordable coverage, we're going to be supporting in this Congress.
Looking at a situation that happened a little more closer to home in the Merrimack Valley this past fall, this question comes in from Mary in Andover, and it pertains to the natural gas disaster, and just talks a little bit about how when the disaster actually happened, there was a lot of media attention and focus on that particular issue, but that it went on for months, and that some of the media attention and the response to the residents wasn't as quick as people would have liked. Are there things, looking back, that could have been done differently, even in your office, to support or within the community to have quicker action to those events going forward?
That's a great question. We spend an unbelievable amount of time on the ground in Lawrence and Andover, dealing with families and businesses, a lot of small businesses who haven't been made whole as a result of the disaster. We spend a lot of time in Washington working with our 2 senators and Congressman Moulton on making sure that we're not seeing rate hikes or the cost of cleanup and aftermath being passed on to ratepayers, making sure that Columbia Gas isn't leaving town and leaving these cities and towns with a huge bill. So it is true, right? You have a lot of suspicion after the cameras leave, after folks declare victory, after the last house gets power, that folks are going to be forgotten. I wasn't in office when the explosions hit, but I'm in office now. And we're working hand in hand with E Para Todos, which is E for All, making sure that the small businesses, which are pretty much the ones who are most affected right now, imagine these small businesses, these markets, these bodegas, these small restaurants in Lawrence, who have claims with Columbia Gas because lost inventory, they lost sales. It wasn't just a month of sales. They've lost all their sales because people aren't coming back. People aren't going out and supporting these businesses. The whole community in Lawrence, for example, left town. So that you can't do that calculation on a spreadsheet alone. Right? You have to understand someone's business. You have to understand the flow of their business, and you have to take that into account in your calculations. So we're injecting a fair amount of empathy into those conversations with Columbia Gas, and we're also working very closely with Andover, North Andover, and Lawrence to make sure that they have the resources that they need and that they're not stuck with a bill. In terms of legislation, it is our job to wring out every possible lesson. NTSB started an investigation last year, and there were some preliminary findings. And the state of Massachusetts was really great on this, because the second they got the recommendation that a certified engineer needs to approve a change order, they made that law. Right? They made that a state regulation, because that's exactly what happened. Right? The depressurization was caused when a sensor was inadvertently taken out of the pipeline, and there was no engineer to check that. So we got to make that standard best practice across the country so that never happens again. And as NTSB continues to investigate to figure out exactly what went wrong, we're going to be codifying those lessons through legislation. And we're working with Chairman DeFazio, who heads up the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. We're going to have Chris Pappas, newly elected congressman from New Hampshire, who's on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, along with Congressman Lynch, come and observe so that they can also see firsthand.
As you take a little second.
I don't talk this long.
Sip of water there. So we have had several questions this evening that have been raised around healthcare and different efforts to support healthcare. But this one in particular talks about some of the challenges of mental health. Can you talk a little bit about any efforts or initiatives specifically that are targeted or funding that's being allocated to specifically address some of the mental health deficiencies that are in our communities and is really becoming a nationwide epidemic?
Yep. There's no question that no matter what community I go to, there is a big funding gap. Healthcare is, I think, where we feel it the most. But I'll back up and just say we have to take the stigma, and I think all of you would agree, we have to take the stigma out of treating mental health. There are proposals right now, Medicaid for More, as a way of funding more services that treat mental health. We see this with the opioid epidemic and sort of tackling the dual diagnosis of an addiction with mental health, and we have to get at that. We also see it in our schools. I mean, right now we're having a state debate around the funding formula, and I'm firmly advocating and will always fight for not just proper funding for elementary and secondary education, but also IDEA. Do you all know that? It's the Disabilities Education Act, and making sure that, and that was, I believe it was in 1973 or 1975 when there was IDEA funding. The commitment was supposed to be on a federal level that they would share the burden of that cost 40%. In FY18, it was 15%. Now we know who's paying for that, who's filling in that gap as best they can. It's our schools, it's our public schools. They don't have the money to do that. The federal government has to step up, to fund special education and make sure we get closer to our commitment that we made in the 1970s, and we have to do that in healthcare as well. This is one of those areas, not so much on the healthcare side, but there's a lot of legislation being introduced to change that funding formula for healthcare and making sure folks with mental health issues have the benefits that they need. But I get to have a voice in terms of our school systems and making sure that we change that funding model and we invest in students who need special education, who are attending public schools with disabilities, that they get the services that they need.
If we look back to focus on Washington for a minute, this question comes in and it says, what is being done to protect the rule of law regarding, in particular, President Trump's recent attempt to circumvent Congress with the wall funding? He recently vetoed the rejection of the emergency declaration. How does this get addressed in Washington?
Well, it's better today than it was 2 years ago, or even last year. We do have a branch of government. Congress is acting like a co-equal branch of government and a check and balance on the administration, which I think is required. I mean, when you read the Constitution, that's Article 1, right? Our founding fathers always knew that we had to have a check and balance, and we needed, 3 separate but equal branches of government. It's funny, I'm going to reminisce a little bit. When I started on January 3rd, there was a shutdown. We opened the government back up. It was all around border security. And then we had a debate and finally a budget resolution on border security. That was bipartisan, right? We had members of the Senate, members of the House, Democrats and Republicans all come together to figure out what we needed in terms of border security funding. That was bipartisan. It was bicameral. It was focused on giving money to evidence-based solutions. We know what the problem is. We have people who are coming up to our border because they're seeking asylum. That's a very different problem than what a wall would resolve. We have contraband and drugs coming into our country through ports of entry. We need technology for that. We need infrastructure for that. We need people for that at our ports of entry. And so that was a robust debate, and one that was clear to me and clear to Republicans and Democrats in both the Congress and the Senate in terms of not giving funding for an ineffective, wasteful wall. Now, to reverse all that, the actions of the House, the actions of the Senate, to declare a national emergency, well, that is an affront to our current system. Because national emergencies are for real emergencies, not contrived, made-up emergencies. They're for natural disasters. They're for terrorist attacks. They're for military action. And so, yeah, everyone in the House and the Senate came down hard on that, on the ability for a president to just declare after something has already gone through the deliberative process, those branches of government to say, no, I'm going to get it anyway. This is going to be an ongoing fight. We just got the president's budget. There's no question that there's funding, including in that budget, for a wall at the expense of slashing all the domestic programs that we have today. So it's a fight that we're going to continue, but we've got the fortitude to keep fighting that fight.
Thank you. Kind of as a follow-up to that particular theme, another question came in just around how do we actually bring civility back to Washington? How do you really have our daily practices, be civil discourse is obviously appreciated within debate, but how does that civility get restored in Washington so that an agenda can be moved forward?
It is better than you think. It's better than I thought. If you watch CNN or you watch Fox News, you kind of have a warped view, right? I mean, you just do it. I'm still blown away that, I get called the gentle lady from Massachusetts by people who couldn't disagree with me more. It's a fair question. But I think, there's something missing right now, and it's hard to diagnose when it went missing or why. But I do see this Congress, this freshman class in particular, people who ran not so much on just the platform of holding the administration accountable, but also wanted more accountability from the people they represent to get Congress out of gridlock, right? There is a real feeling that we have to show the country that we can develop the muscle once again to work together. And that, I think, is being done. I think that's being done in committees. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. One of the positive externalities of serving on that committee is it's the most bipartisan committee. There's a lot of relationship building that I hope to achieve there that will hopefully spill over onto the House floor on other issues that I care about besides, national security, cybersecurity, things like that. But I see those relationships happening all the time. I see Republicans crossing the floor and wanting to know about my district with the goal of figuring out ways that maybe we can work together on some issues. I walk over and I talk to guys like Dan Crenshaw because I know that there are infrastructure needs or workforce training. There's a big gap between what Dan and I, believe in or what our priorities are. But if we could find a couple things to work on together, I think it proves to the country that we can build that muscle again. And we have to build that muscle again, especially on some of the important issues that are facing not just our districts, but the country at large. So I know sometimes it seems grim. Turn off your TV. That's what I do. And get off social media. That's what I do.
Two good recommendations. So we actually have a question from Ray going back to more of a local type issue. But what is being done at the federal level to help repair and rebuild some of our surrounding roads and infrastructure, particularly in Lowell? He cites, say, the Rourke Bridge, but there were a lot of infrastructure projects that need some attention. Is there anything being done at the federal level to support local efforts?
Yes. Everybody wants to pass a nice, big infrastructure bill. We don't know how big it's going to be, but we know that it's going to create jobs. It's going to create good-paying jobs in our community while simultaneously repairing our bridges and roads, restore pipeline safety, solve our sewer and water issues, rebuild our schools. Those are happening in all sorts of committees, but it's to make the package broad. And I think everyone knows that we need a highway bill and we need an infrastructure bill. So that is actually being worked on. How big that's going to be? Well, I think Chairman Richie Neal is working on that in Ways and Means. But I do think that every committee is contributing their version and their portion to that bill. It doesn't matter where I go, whether it's Route 2 in Concord, the Rourke Bridge in Lowell, which is the bridge I go over all the time and have my whole life, to Fitchburg, right? You can't even drive on some of their streets anymore. We have to solve this problem. We have an issue with funding, but we're going to resolve that. I wish we did not have a $2 trillion deficit because it would make it a little bit easier. But regardless of that, we're going to find a way to fund an infrastructure bill. And I know that there's a lot of support, not just on the Democratic side of the aisle, but it's an opportunity for us to work with Republicans on that as well. So stay tuned. I will say yesterday I had a lunch with the state senators and the state reps from all over the district, just so that I could compare notes with what I heard from city managers and mayors on what their infrastructure needs were, what were some of the areas that we could work on together, because so many of our state delegations are working on CSO issues, for example. So I do consider that a very collaborative effort in terms of working with the state delegation, but also delivering the federal funds that we need.
Great. So as I look through the various questions that some of the constituents today brought you, we've covered a wide range of topics from gun violence to health issues, mental health issues, infrastructure needs, dealings in Washington, and then obviously some environmental issues as well. I tried to go through the different questions and categorize them so that we could get as many responses from you as possible. But I know you and your staff really wanted an opportunity also to hear directly from people here today if they had specific questions that didn't get addressed in your initial talking points. So we have two of your staff members, Ryan on my right and Megan on the left side, that actually have microphones and are going to go through the audience to take some questions. We'll alternate sides of the room, and the only thing I would ask is if you do have a question, if you raise your hand, either Ryan or Megan will come to you for the microphone. If a question has already been asked or a topic has already been covered, try to allow someone else to ask a question, but we have about 20 minutes left in the program to be able to do this. So if you do have a question, on the right side of the room, again, Ryan, if you can seek someone out with a hand raised. Megan, on the left side of the room, if you could raise your hand. And Ryan, we'll actually start with you. If you could find someone with a hand up for the first question.
Hi, Guy from Groton. Good to see you again, Laurie. Great event. Just a few comments. Number one, I'd like you to work with Congresswoman Gabbard and Congresswoman Chapter to reinstate the Return to Prudent Banking Act. It was H.R. 790 in the previous Congress. We need to get back to a national bank use credit for infrastructure development. A lot of that could go towards the new Green Deal. For that, we have to go to a higher energy flexible density as infusion energy. For about 2 years, we heard about our elections being influenced. We have to get away from internet registration and internet voting, which is the top two of H.R. 1, as well as same-day registration. There's plenty of time between now and the next elections for people to register, so we don't need same day. We have to do away with a private entity controlling our economy,
Okay, thank you.
namely the Federal Reserve. Okay? We have to get back to Hamilton, FDR, and create,
And a little bit of Teddy, too, right?
yes, a little bit of Teddy.
As well.
And,
Sorry.
well,
Well, can I comment on a couple of those? Because I feel bad for Ryan, I think his knee is sore. But I will, there is so much legislation right now being reintroduced. I mean, you can only imagine, just think of it, right? There was not a lot of legislation being introduced the last 2 years, or it was, but it was sort of dying on the vine in terms of Democratic proposals. And a lot of that legislation is being reintroduced, and then a lot of brand new legislation is being introduced as a result of just being so many new members. We've signed on to 58 bills so far, and that number probably grew over the weekend. But we're reading, and I would encourage, because sometimes, you all do know legislation that you care about because you've been following it Congress after Congress. And that is where I would encourage you to absolutely call, the Lowell office, which is 459-0101, the DC office. These numbers don't change from member to member, which is, I just learned that. When they said the number in DC is 202-225-3411, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was the same number when I was a staff person. It's written in my brain. But let us know. Let us know the legislation that you care about, the HR number, who those sponsors are. I mean, we are signing on to legislation as quickly as we can and getting behind proposals so that it has enough co-sponsors to get a vote on the House floor. So it's an important part of this process. And certainly, you just mentioned Marcy Kaptur, who I've long admired. And, I'll flag it and we'll review it. And we'll, consider jumping on as well. Yes, I know. Well, there's no shortage of people in Washington who wake up wanting to run for president.
Megan, it's your turn on the left side of the room.
Hi. Hi, this is Kathleen from Townsend.
Hi.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I've never come to a town hall, so the past 2 years has changed a lot of things for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah.
My question is about the Republican tax plan.
Yeah.
We just got our tax bill. Middle-class people, we got killed. I can't even tell you. All the deductions that were taken away. And I don't know who this plan benefited, but it wasn't us.
Nope.
And on top of it, there's no plan for the budget and just having the deficit. What happened to fiscal responsibility with Republicans?
Yes, the Democrats have rebranded ourselves into the party of fiscal responsibility. It's hard. I had a meeting with labor unions 2 weeks ago, and people were coming in after doing their taxes. And, last year around this time, people were seeing a little bit of a bump in their paycheck. And we knew that was fleeting, and we said it was fleeting. But this is the year that people are really getting hurt, right? People who got refunds are not getting refunds. People who, were relying on that income, it's getting cut in half. The deductions, or taking away putting the cap on the deductions for folks in Massachusetts specifically has hurt families here. 83% of the benefit from that tax cut went to 1%, and that is just not fair tax policy. We need a major course correction. There's no question about it. we need to basically reverse that. We need 83% of the benefit to go to 83% of our hardworking men and women out there. And those discussions are happening. They're happening on the Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction over tax policy, but they're also happening across other committees that share jurisdiction. So, I do think we're going to see that course correction, and it's not just because it's an unfair tax policy, one that widens the income inequality gap in our country. But we've got a problem. We are financing our debt to the tune of the same amount that we pay for all of DOD on an annual basis. We cannot sustain that. We cannot sustain that. And these are good times. I mean, I don't know about you. I've got 3 stepsons, 2 young daughters. My husband and I, when we're in good times, we pay down our debt, right? Because we know they're not going to last forever. We've got to get ready for when our economy starts to recede a bit, and we're not in a strong position to do that. Our deficit is far too high. What we're spending on interest is just out of control. So I do think we're going to see a course correction in our tax policy to basically help close that income inequality gap and give the largest benefit in this country to the hardworking men and women in the working and middle class. So.
Congresswoman, first off, thank you for hosting this event, and we're so excited to have you in office and so excited to have so many newly elected women, so I just want to emphasize that from that question. But my question is, I am really concerned about the Trump administration's attacks on the LGBTQ community, and I'm really concerned about the transgender troop ban, and just wondering if you can speak a little bit to your work on that and what you plan to do about that. Thanks.
Yep. I was trying to go through my head, like, what hasn't come up? And that's a big one. I was proud to co-sponsor Representative Dave Cicilline's Equality Act, which basically ends the debate on equality in our country and gives equal rights to our entire LGBTQ community. There aren't many hearings that you sit in that just really, kind of bring you to your knees. I sat in one of those hearings sorry, I just messed that up. Yeah, I sat on one of those hearings in the subcommittee, the Military Personnel Subcommittee, where I watched the first panel come in, and it was 5 courageous, qualified, transgender military men and women talk about their service. Talk about, don't lower the standards for me. I don't need it. I'm qualified. I want to fight for our country. I love my country. And I just want to keep doing the job that I've been doing, right? I mean, I don't think that there was a dry eye on the committee, because the trans ban is so discriminatory, and it's just so hurtful to people who have served our country at a time when not everyone has to. Then I watched the next panel, was pathetic, around how we're hiding behind this isn't a discriminatory policy. Well, it is a discriminatory policy, and it's one we're going to fight every step of the way. We're not going to allow this ban to go into effect. We're going to pass legislation, which Congressman Joe Kennedy has already introduced, to stop this from happening. This is not the country we live in. We have not made all this progress to turn our back on people who have had equal marriage rights, on people who rely on our country setting the bar high and being a beacon for the rest of the world. And so I'm happy that I get to use my voice as part of the Armed Services Committee to roll back this discriminatory practice.
Megan,
Yes.
Megan on the left side of the room.
Yes, Rep. Trahan, I have a question about the tech industry, which I think you worked in, And are you aware of something called surveillance capitalism? And it's a very dangerous corporate move to take all of our data, turn it into behavioral data so they can predict or control our behavior in voting, in driving, in buying, so that they can make more money. It's a very, very scary thing. Are you aware of that?
So I'm not aware of the term, but the concept that you just described, I share your concern. I think that, I don't know if you remember this, but like when Google first entered the world, it was, we do no harm. It was, and they sort of earned our trust. They earned our trust. And it was almost like you would trust Google with your private information more so than you would trust anyone else, government included. That's changed. It's completely changed, right? So when I think about the tech industry and the lack of regulation that's there right now, we've got personal identifiable information that's a concern to so many, how that information is being used. We've got Facebook that's basically moderating themselves all over the world with no regulation, frankly, in places that concern our national security. And I think that there are a lot of people getting at this conversation in terms of how are we going to hold the tech industry accountable, right? There's some big, bold ideas in terms of breaking them up. And then there's ideas around how are we going to regulate them. And so I think we're going to see on the Energy and Commerce Committee specifically, those tech companies come in and have to first tell us what they have, right? What information that they have, what their plans are for it, their role in the promotion and the distribution of news that isn't real, of foreign governments that are trying to infiltrate our politics, and then their self-regulation practices. Because I think all of that has been sort of a gray area that we need to shine a light on. And so I do share your concern about how, just from a civil liberties standpoint, and how our personally identifiable information is being used and tracked and stored, but then also, more broadly, how these companies haven't had to sort of undergo any accountability for their self-regulatory practices.
Laurie, we have time for one more question, so we're going to actually look to Ryan on the right side of the room for Ryan's last question.
Congressman, thank you for representing our district. I know it's a strain on a family, and I really appreciate it. I saw you during the campaign, and I thanked you a couple of times for running. Thank you for representing us for the next 2 years in Middlesex 3. My question is along respite care. I'm chairman at a handicapped school in town and in the area, and I have a disabled son, 34 years old. In our state, Massachusetts, arguably you represent just a small portion for the next 2 years, but in our state we have just 3 respite care facilities where I can take my son and take the weekend off or go on vacation for a couple of days. We had one in Lowell called the Woodland Inn in your district that's now gone. So there's one in Taunton, there's a new one coming up in Lexington, and there's one in Fall River, I believe, down that way. The one in Lexington that's just about to open is not wheelchair accessible. Now, I'll put you on the spot a little bit. Would you consider stepping up over the next 2 years, establishing a respite facility in your district on behalf of, I see a lot of gray hair in this room, and I know there's disabled people as well, to care for our caregivers that keep their children, in my case 34-year-old, or their elderly parents at home. Yeah. And I'm going to preface it, I'm a long speaker.
No, that's fine.
I'm going to preface it by this comment. My son was injured at his care facility. He goes into a daily program. And at the emergency room, the nurse told me that oh, it's Thanksgiving, we're going to have a bunch of granny dumping here over the next 2 days. In other words, people that want to go on vacation, take a couple days off, bring their care clients to hospitals instead. Could you commit to possibly opening a respite facility like Woodland Inn in Lowell again? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the question, and thank you for the advocacy for your son. I mean, I'm looking around this room, and my dad's not here today, and he's probably come to every single event. He's in a wheelchair. He has MS. He's been battling it for, 25 years. Because he got into a car accident last week, and his, handicap accessible van is, totaled, right? So I so understand when our restaurants and our facilities are not ADA compliant, exactly what it does to a person. I would love to find out more about respite care and what the funding mechanism is for a facility and how we can be helpful. I mean, there's no question that there's a lot of disparities in how we deliver health care. And there's gaps everywhere, not just in income inequality, but physical equality. And so I would love to learn more about it. The fact that you don't have a place nearby should not be the case. And so please let us know. I'm delighted to work on it, and hopefully it is something that I could commit to working with you on. But I'd love to find out more. Thank you. We have time for a couple more questions, don't we, Jay? That's right here in the front row. Let's have a...
I really appreciate your focus on ethics and on campaign finance reform, and I'd like to give you an opportunity and to call you to accountability to answer for the accusations in the Globe article that you have been silent about for weeks. I would like to know, will you release your bank statements? And because you are a consultant, as I also am, I would like to know if you would please release the list of folks who you were consulting to during the time that you earned the income that you used in the last week's.
Sure. So thank you. Thank you for the question. I do appreciate the opportunity to set the record straight. So for those of you that don't know, there was a story in the Globe that it was based on a partial view of my finances, specifically my income from 2018, because we filed disclosure forms in May. I will file again in May 2019. That will give a full view of my personal resources as well as the income that I made last year. I want to be super clear. The suggestion that I did not have the personal resources to make that loan to my campaign is just inaccurate. We've complied with every regulation with the FEC and the Office of Ethics, and I think that's all going to be cleared up when we file our next report. I'm going to change gears. Can I do this? I just want to back up a little bit because a story hurt. Last year, we ran a scrappy campaign. I was an underdog candidate. I didn't take corporate PAC money, raised the majority of my money from people who lived in this district. In fact, I raised more money from people who live in this district than all 9 of my competitors combined. And I got outspent 3.5 to 1. I was fortunate that I was in a position to loan my campaign funds to kind of keep pace with the field. And another thing is, I grew up in a working class family. I grew up in Lowell and worked a bunch of years in the tech industry. I started my own company with 2 other women, eventually took that company over, and I built it into a successful company. It's hard to do. I'm proud of it. I want to make that more of a model. I want more women to be able to do that. I want more women to have the opportunity to thrive. So I think there's a lot of narratives you want to change when you're taking on a run like this, when you're going down to Congress as one of those 131 women, and that's one of them, right? That women can start successful businesses, they can earn income, they can have affordable daycare, they can get paid the same as men who are doing the same job, and then they can make a loan that they can afford to their campaign. So thank you. One more?
We can do one more.
You've been waiting patiently. I'll give you my mic.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for your work on the Nashua River. It's really beautiful and a great antidote to television. Thank you very much.
Will you tell our children that?
Absolutely, absolutely. A couple of days ago, a report was released that documents that the fossil fuel industry is spending $200 million per year just on lobbying against efforts to address climate change, either to block it or delay it, including many of the proposals that are going to be part of the Green New Deal, which you support, and I thank you for that. So, given this massive influence in Washington, are you prepared to sign the No Fossil Fuels pledge? Be great if you could do it today. We have it here if you'd like to sign it today. So thank you.
So thank you. I appreciate the question. I always, maybe naively so, think that because I signed, the one pledge that I thought was overarching all pledges, the one not to take corporate PAC money, that would be satisfactory, right? The fossil fuel industry is included in that pledge. And that's exactly what, we've done. I am focused on fighting special corporate interests. It's the reason why I don't take corporate PAC money. I do know that the disproportionately loud voice that the fossil fuel industry, the NRA, has on our politics. It's the reason why I want to make it clear to folks that I'm working for you. I always have. I always will. I hope that the way I've taken contributions from my campaign will always signal that. But if you ever feel as though I'm not accountable enough, you call me, and you call me out on meetings like this. I appreciate these questions, and I appreciate, the transparency. It's what I stand for. So thank you. We'll review it today. We'll review it today. I take my time on reading legislation, on reading pledges. I can't believe it doesn't satisfy you that I signed the corporate PAC pledge. It subsumes all others. It's like up here.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's fair, and that's new. So I will. I'll read it. I'll read it. Thank you. Thank you.
Congresswoman, it's Jay over here at the table.
Yeah. Lost my way. It's the disco ball, I have to be honest.
I'm still over here. Yes, Friday nights they have incredible dances here at the school for the kids. No, thank you very much on behalf of allowing me to be a part of this today. I very much appreciate again you coming to Chelmsford, holding your first forum here.
Thank you.
We're excited to host you again in the future if you decide to do that. But I very much appreciate it. What I am going to do in talking to your staff is I'll provide them with all of the questions that didn't get answered, just so that you'll have all the different topics for follow-up.
That's great.
And very much appreciate you coming today.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. Thank you.